So as I mentioned, everybody can see the PowerPoint, okay? It's looking good on your end? Yes, thank you. Okay, as I mentioned, you are here to learn a little bit more about curriculum changes at the university and what goes into those processes for making changes in your units, getting them approved here at the institution, and also potentially sending those on to the Ministry of Advanced Education for approval as well. I am joined today by a few great and knowledgeable speakers from our Program Innovation Hub, Kelly Hoglund, who you may have seen before, and Jessica Revington, both of whom have probably supported you or others in your units through the program development process at some stage. And we are also joined by a member of our human resources team who will speak a little bit later about some of the change management pieces. Her name is Morag, she's waving. So we've got a great team of experts here with us today. I want to first take a moment to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Good Stoney First Nations. And as we know, the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. We are very grateful and very privileged to be able to deliver this workshop both from our homes in Calgary and the surrounding area, as well as from the University of Calgary. And we do take this commitment and this acknowledgement very seriously in our work. Just to provide a quick overview of the learning objectives for today's session, we would like you to be able to come away at the end of this workshop knowing some of the key factors that motivate curricular change at the university, what the governance processes associated with those changes might look like, and including what constitutes ministerial approval and why, what kinds of information are included in proposals for curricular changes, and the various types of information that will be required depending on the type of change that you want to make. And then just a quick review of some of the resources that are available at the institution to support you as you explore and seek approval for curriculum changes in your programs. So there's many reasons why a curriculum change might take place at our institution. And so this just highlights a few of those potential reasons. So number one, you may have just finished a curriculum review or a unit review, and that process has shed some light on some potential changes that you would like to make to your unit based on all sorts of reasons that you sort of investigate through that process. There may also be some changes to the labor market or industry demand or potentially accreditation if that's associated with your program. And so curricular changes are required to respond to those things. As we know, government and institutional priorities can also have an impact on the types of programs that we offer and how we go about offering them. So that may result in a curricular change to an existing program. There might be changes to the discipline or the profession, and so there are updates that are required to ensure that students are walking away with the most up-to-date and meaningful information that they can. As I mentioned, there might also be some changes to student needs or student demand. There may also be incredible student demand for a program, and so we are required to scale that program up, and so that requires some curricular changes to consider. And finally, there might be some other types of advances, such as changes in teaching and learning or curriculum design. For example, we've seen curriculums redesigned to structure themselves according to a spiral curriculum. So there's lots of different reasons. This captures some of them. And we'll go into details about a few different examples and what's required as you go through the process. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Kelly to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Jaclyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Hoglund. I work in the Program Innovation Hub supporting units and faculties across campus as they make changes to existing programs or want to develop new programs. So it's really nice to be here today. Before we get started talking about changing the curriculum, I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of the terminology. If you're new to the university or you haven't been like deeply involved in program structure and calendar language before, or understand what our ministry system is all about, then there's just some basic terminology I want to make sure everyone understands. So the calendar, when I talk about calendar and calendar changes, that's our academic calendar. So those are the regulations, policies that govern our programs for the students, whether it's admission requirements, graduation requirements, progression requirements, and all of the surrounding things. Papers is the Ministry of Advanced Education's IT platform software that tracks all of the programs across the province. So all of our degree programs are recorded in papers. All of our graduate certificates, graduate diplomas, degrees, they're all in there. So in papers, they also record how many units per term, per year, or total in the program are involved. So that's called load. And so if we want to change the load, so changing the total number of units per year or per term or overall, that's called a load change. Some programs are block loaded. So this means that for most thesis-based programs, it's just entered as a total course load in units per year. And as long as any changes don't put the overall units per year beyond what's in papers, then we don't need to go to the government with that initiative. Next slide. Degrees are pretty self-explanatory. That's the credential. Sub-degree nomenclature. So this is important because it's below the degree level. It's tracked in papers as well. So area of study is the graduate terminology, major is the undergraduate terminology. So if you're doing a Bachelor of Arts in history, history is your major. If you're doing a Master of Education and educational research is your area of study. There's two types of approvals processes that proposals for changes may need to go through. One is internal approvals. Those are internal UCalgary governance processes. And the other is government approvals. So the government has, at the Ministry of Advanced Education, they have their own approval system to review and approve certain types of changes. All right. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? Okay. I don't see anything. All right. So when we're talking about curricular changes, they might be small, medium, or large. So I don't know, I love dogs, so I thought this was fun. And so when we're talking so the size and the nature of the curricular change can impact, the depth and length of the proposal and what it addresses, as well as the approvals process it needs to go through. Next slide. Okay, so the smallest type of change that we look at with curricular revisions are what we call calendar changes. So these just have to go through the approvals process, whereby changes to the calendar entry are approved. So some types of these changes could be replacing a small number of required or elective courses within a major or in a program with the same number of new required courses. So if you have course A, B, and C, and they're not doing the job anymore, maybe you want to change the way that the course material is delivered. And then you want to replace it with 3 new courses, and the original 3 courses added up to 9 units, and the new 3 courses add up to 9 units. You can do that. That's a calendar change. As long as it's a smaller proportion of the overall courses required in the program. So for some graduate programs where there are very few course requirements, switching 3 out for 3 new courses might be considered a bigger change. But if it's an undergraduate program where you have a lot of core courses, a lot of electives, because your bachelor's degree is 120 units, rather than 12 units, say in a thesis-based master's program, then you have, it's just a greater proportion, right? And the master's side, less on the undergrad side. Do you want to add a new elective course as an option for a program? That's a calendar change. Changing to the course list for the designated field of study. So if I'm in statistics, for example, and there's a new course in data science that's been created, but it's very statistics heavy, then I could potentially add that to the statistics field of study. That'd be a calendar change. And recognition of laddering credit. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with laddering. That's when students can go into, I'll just use this one route as an example. They go into a graduate certificate program, they complete the 12 units, then they go into a graduate diploma program that requires 24 units. They get 12 units of advanced, called laddering credit, towards their graduate diploma. And then when they go into the master's program, they take all 24 units that they completed between the certificate and the diploma into the master's. So that's called laddering credit. So if you have an existing degree, for example, and you want to create a new certificate program that ladders, or sorry, you have an existing degree and existing certificate programs at the universities, they both already are approved and up and running, and you want to allow the certificate to ladder into your master's, that would be a calendar change, because that would be a change to the laddering credit section of your calendar entry. So some examples of this, like I said, the existing course-based degree who wants to allow students who do the certificate to receive laddering credit towards the master's. And then again, that replacing those 3 courses for 3 new courses would be examples of these types of calendar changes. So calendar revisions have their own approvals process. So course admission and program changes, your faculty or your department will bring these forward to the calendar and curriculum subcommittee working group, who reviews it and approves it. They recommend it to another committee called the calendar and curriculum subcommittee. And that goes on to the final committee. And I'll talk about all these committees and what they do shortly. Goes on to the final one for approval. So this is for undergraduate, and your faculties and units should already have a process for this, for your regular yearly calendar updates and changes that most programs have every year. There's usually a tweak. People want to create a new course or whatever. That would be a calendar change, and so it goes through that process. And then on the graduate side.
Sorry, Kelly, before we move on,
Yeah.
Lorena was just asking me in the chat. So if they are thinking about kind of leaving the learning outcomes the same for an existing course, but changing how they teach it, would this require a calendar change?
Possibly. So it might or might not, depending how the course description. So if the existing course description in the calendar for that particular course will still be relevant to the newly designed course, and as long as that course still has the same number of credit hours for lecture, lab, and tutorial that the original course did, then you might not even need a calendar change. Any other questions? Okay. So on the graduate side, it's similar. It's just that graduate calendar changes don't need to go to a final committee called APPC. And again, within your faculty or unit, you'll have kind of your own calendar change process. They vary depending. Some faculties and schools have subcommittees Like in science and arts, they have a graduate curriculum and academic review committee, or GCARC. Then they have one on the undergrad side. They review the calendar changes before they go to your faculty council to get voted on. All right. Okay. So when you're putting forward a calendar change, just a few things to consider. One is that your calendar changes require a rationale. So you need to write a rationale for the change to accompany the proposed calendar changes. Most departments and faculties have a designated calendar coordinator who works with the calendar editors and is familiar with the departmental and faculty level processes. And then there are also resources and information for calendar requirements on the registrar's office website. So they have a whole section there. The links, when Jaclyn posts the slides, you'll be able to click on the links, and we can also send them out later. And so just keep in mind with calendar changes that there are deadlines. So if you want, for instance, your calendar to be changed for the fall 2025 academic year, the 2025 to 26 calendar gets published in March of 2025. And so your calendar changes would need to be submitted by October 15th of 2024. So it gives you an idea of how far ahead you have to work a lot of times when you're doing these types of calendar changes. Okay. So the next size of program revisions be the border collie size from the photo. So these are medium revisions. They're considered substantive changes to your program. And so there can be a lot of different types of changes, but they all require a program proposal. So these are more than calendar changes. So they need more than the rationale piece that goes along with your proposed calendar changes. This is a proposal that's written on a template. And in the Program Innovation Hub, the proposal liaison who is assigned to you for that project, they will provide that template for you after they meet with you to make sure you're getting the right template that's appropriate for your changes. So there's lots of different examples of medium program revision, so making a substantive change to course requirements in a program without changing load. So let's say you have a master's degree program and there's 18 units of required courses, so 6 3-unit courses, and you want to delete 5 of those, create 5 new courses to replace them, and it kind of changes the nature of your program. It's not a repackaging of kind of course material. It's maybe adding new courses to reflect changes in the discipline or meeting accreditation requirements, but it doesn't change the total load, so the total number of units in that year or in the program overall. So that would need a program proposal. If you want to add a course-based stream to a thesis-based program, that would require a program proposal. Creating a new concentration or specialization within an existing degree program would also require a proposal. So we've had a few examples of these over the years. So Leanne mentioned she's working with the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. They're making very substantial changes to their program. They're not changing the load, but they're changing the course requirements significantly, and the way the courses are structured and things like that. So they're working on a program proposal right now. Sorry, I thought I was gonna sneeze there. Okay. And then other examples could be creating an honors stream in an existing bachelor's degree if there's not one already. And let's just see here. And sometimes we find even reducing, let's just see. Changing the number of work terms in a co-op program is another example that would need a program proposal. All right, so an example of what we did this past year, just on the next slide, Jaclyn, is I supported a proposal that went through on changing the course requirements for the MSc thesis-based program in chemistry. And so chemistry is one of those courses, like I mentioned, that's block loaded into papers, the ministry system. So we didn't need to do a load change because this isn't exceeding the number of units they have recorded for this program for either year of the program. So what they did is they took their 6 units of core courses and 3 units of electives, and they changed it around. So now they have 4 units of required core courses and 3 units of electives. And so it reduced it from 9 units to 7 units for the amount of courses required. Along with this, so we incorporated this into the proposal, so it kind of went through as a package. But if they'd only done the other things and not done the change in units, the creation of a new 1-unit core course, and then creation of 20 1-unit modular courses for students to take to fulfill their elective requirements. Those could have gone through as a calendar change, but we packaged them together as a whole proposal because we needed a proposal anyways. Any questions about that? No? Okay. Next slide. Perfect. Okay, so I've mentioned the approvals process before. We talked a little bit about this when we did calendar. We talked about calendar changes, but the medium-sized program revisions, these substantive changes that are more than calendar changes, need to go through our UCalgary governance processes. And it needs to go through the whole process and end up getting approved by the Academic Planning and Priorities Committee. So the way these committees are set up, they have to be in line with the government's Post-Secondary Learning Act. And so our General Faculties Council has designated authority to APBC to review and approve proposals for the creation, alteration, or termination of degrees, credit certificates, and diplomas, and then non-credit professional and continuing education certificate and diploma programs. So we won't get too much into the non-credit ones today unless someone has some questions about those. All right, so this is our process internally at the university for program proposals. So it starts off so it goes to the faculty council, and it goes to another committee called the decision support team. So the decision support team is a consultative group. It's not an approval body, but it's comprised of key stakeholders from around the university, such as the registrar, the vice provost of teaching and learning, some educational development consultants from the Taylor Institute, someone from finance, the dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies, for example, all sit at decision support team. So they review proposals early in the process and provide feedback intended to strengthen the proposal as it moves forward. You can go to your faculty council or decision support team in either order, but you have to go through both of them before you either go to Faculty of Graduate Studies or the Academic Program Subcommittee. And so on the grad side, there's an additional layer because all graduate students are admitted to the Faculty of Graduate Studies, and they take programs in their home faculty and department. So graduate programs need to go through 1 to 2 Faculty of Grad Studies committees, for sure the executive committee, and then some need to go to council. And then it goes to the graduate academic program subcommittee, and then the final approval comes from the Academic Planning and Priorities Committee. So a couple things to note. that some faculties or schools have departmental committees and or executive committees that you have to take your proposal to before you can go to faculty council. So arts and science, for example, have this. Other faculties have policies where you have to take a proposal to your faculty council for information one meeting and then for recommendation the next meeting. So you have to go to 2 faculty council meetings with a proposal. And so this process, it usually takes about 4 to 8 months to move through all the committee meetings because most committees meet about once a month. So depending kind of when your proposal is done and ready to start moving through governance, it'll take about 4 months to move through. All right. Okay, so under major program revisions, we count load changes, which is changing the number of units of coursework per term per year or overall within the ministry system, and major program changes, so full curricular redesign. So for instance, what veterinary medicine is doing right now that don't result in change in load. So these also require a proposal, templates provided by our office and program innovation hub. There's the curricular redesign without the load change and a load change proposal. They're a bit different and they have a slightly different approvals process. So the major program changes without a change in load is the same process as the medium-sized changes. And so that just requires our internal approvals process up to APPC. The load change goes through our full internal approvals process, and then we have to submit it to the Ministry of Advanced Education. So that adds anywhere from 2 to 6 months onto the timeline. All right, so I'll show you an example now. So a couple years ago, our office supported a proposal to reduce the course requirements in the Master of Public Policy. So they originally had 39 units, they wanted to change it to 33. So they wanted to delete the top 2 courses, 601 and 603. Then they wanted to change Public Policy 605 from a 3-unit course into a 4-unit course, and then introduce Public Policy 604, that was a 2-unit course, to replace Public Policy 621. So you can follow the arrows in the chart there. And so the important thing to note for this is that there has to, again, be a strong rationale for these types of changes. So in this case, there were really strong pedagogical and administrative factors that served as the foundation for their rationale. And committees were looking for information on, how students would be supported through the change, how students would gain some of the knowledge that perhaps 601 and 603 would have provided, and then how this was going to make it a better experience for students. And so the School of Public Policy were able to answer all of those questions and make a really compelling case for why this was important. So this took the total units from 39 to 33, both in our internal systems and then at the ministry level. All right, so the next slide. So we talked a little bit about timelines. Lots of people ask, how long will this take? And I always joke that almost every time I answer a question in this role, the answer is it depends. So the time really depends on a number of different factors and how they all interact. So what are the institutional and government priorities? Is the government funding a brand new program that needs to be up and running right away? If so, then we can allocate more resources, move it more quickly through our system, and the government is more motivated to move quickly on their end. The number and extent of consultations needed. So the more complex the change, the more consultations you need. And in some cases, If you're doing a lot of work with Indigenous communities or folks from equity deserving groups and marginalized communities, then you need to take a lot longer to build and sustain those relationships and make sure you do those consultations in a good way. So that might add some time into the development process. Also, how much time do you have to dedicate to creating this proposal and reworking your curriculum? If the proposal requires government approval or not, that can impact the timeline. And then depending when you start moving through our governance process at the university, you might be impacted by the summer break because we don't have any committee meetings in July or August. So the next slide we'll talk about is kind of how to plan this out. And so when you're planning out a program change, you kind of have to work backwards. So when do you want your students to be in seats in this new curriculum or revised curriculum or program? So let's say you wanted that to start in fall 2026. So that means, so if this was a new concentration, that students would be admitted into the concentration in kind of winter, spring 2026. For that, they would have to apply in kind of late fall, early winter of 25 to 26. Prior to that, they would have to have gone through the approvals process by the end of June 2025. And if they started in March, and that's moving through pretty quickly, and then they would have needed at least a few months for proposal development. So it really could be anywhere from a year and a half plus to take your proposed changes from kind of the idea stage to when you have students in seats. So this is kind of an ideal scenario that allows you more of the admissions and recruitment side for people to come into your revised program if you need it. And then, but depending on some of those factors that we talked about before, maybe that admissions and recruitment period is a little bit shorter. Maybe the implementation is a little bit sooner. Okay, so just to kind of wrap this up, I put this little chart together to show just some different criteria for each of the types of changes. So whether there's government approval required, APPC, if it needs a program proposal or not. And I just want you to note that there may be exceptions when a major curriculum redesign that does not change the load of the program requires government approval. So that's why we really want folks to work with us in our office to provide guidance, because there are some gray areas here and there that pop up. And so if you're working with us, then we're going to make sure that you go through the correct process and we don't have any hiccups. But I just wanted to note that for you. So that wraps things up from my side, talking about the process and approvals and some of the things required. But I'm happy to answer any questions before we turn things over to Jessica to talk about some more considerations.
Maybe I'll just add to that there is certainly no expectation that you understand and memorize the pathways, who's going to do the approving for you. That is really what we're here to do, is support you through that process. And sometimes we don't even know, based on the nature of the change, without bringing it to the decision support team and getting consultation from the Office of the Secretariat. So we will ensure absolutely that the routing is correctly planned, but there's certainly no expectation that you know that from the outset. We will help you with that every step of the way.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Jaclyn. Yeah, Jaclyn's 100% correct. There are some gray areas, and so we can work with the Secretariat's office and Registrar's office and folks to get that sorted for you before anything goes awry.
Are there any questions at this time? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, we're actually going to pause here because I want to introduce you to another colleague of ours, Morag Ritchie. So as some of these curricular changes scale up, and you go from maybe a minor calendar revision that's probably pretty easy to get consensus from the members of your faculty on, to these larger scale changes that maybe become a bit more contentious or you can't get consensus across the board. We have started relying on Morag and her team to sort of support those change management pieces. And so we wanted to give her an opportunity to just speak briefly about what her and her team might be able to offer for you. So go ahead, Morag.
Thanks, Jaclyn. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time. I could talk about this all day, so if you need to give me the hook, please, I don't know, kick me out of the Zoom or something. So I'm Morag Ritchie. I'm Director of Talent Management, and I sit in your Human Resources Department, and I oversee the Talent Management Center of Expertise. And the team that supports change management the most is our team of Senior Organizational Development Consultants. We call them OD because it's too many syllables otherwise. So your OD team is here and happy to support. I was really happy to see Kelly's picture of the dogs, because we often use the analogy of road construction, and change can be a pothole repair, and it can be the Kicking Horse Canyon. And if anyone has driven through that over the last few years, that's pretty significant, but a pothole in the wrong place is also pretty jarring. And so we like to position change as, a really broad continuum. And it doesn't matter how big or small, it can be hard for people to navigate. And so what our team does is supports you in thinking through all the things that are changes. There are the formalities and the procedural process and content, but we help you focus also on the human elements. And, for those of us who've been through change, which means every one of us, we know when we're gung-ho, and it's often because it was our idea. We're a little less gung-ho when we disagree, or we just hadn't thought about it. And so in your roles, you will encounter resistance to whatever changes you're actually trying to implement, and we can help you navigate that. So we look at change from the transitional pieces that are all human-based, and we help you think from our objective kind of third-party position. Who else? Why? And what else? And so we can help you anticipate some roadblocks. We can also help you think about who your champions of this change will be and how best to connect with them and have them help to bring others along on the journey. The reality is change will happen, and we don't get as much out of people if it's felt like it's being done to them. So if we can help you help them see the value of the change, then we're here for you. I also, want to point out, we don't do the change work for you. And so one of the things that's really helpful is call us before you think you need us. And that's easier said than done. It's never too late to call us, but the sooner we can help you map things out, plan ahead for the resources you might need so you can get more people on board to help carry this across the finish line, the better. And it also will give us the chance to really become partners with you so that you feel you've got a thinking partner, an advocate, and someone who can help steer you to other resources should you need them.
And maybe I'll just add as well that we're happy to facilitate that connection too. So if at any point you feel like you want or would like to sort of proactively gain access to that support and you don't remember where to go, we'll make sure to put you in touch with Morag and her team. And I'll also make sure that we add some information in the slide deck on how to connect with her and her team as well, so that you have that to take away. If there are no other questions at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Jessica to carry on the conversation with some sort of key considerations for you to think about.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Morag.
Thanks so much, Morag. And thanks, Jaclyn. So as Jaclyn's pulling up the slides, I think I've met quite a few of you who are in this Zoom room. My name is Jessica Revington, and I work with Kelly and Jaclyn, as well as some of our other colleagues in the Program Innovation Hub. And some of the important considerations and key questions that come out of big changes are kind of the last part of today's workshop, as Kelly's taken us through sort of the process, thinking about some of the things that are really important to center at the outset of any change, no matter how big or small that change might be. When it comes to some of these key questions, a lot of these questions are things that should be asked regardless of the type of change you're hoping for. Even if you think it's relatively small, the thing that will change will be the answers to the questions in terms of telling you where you need to go in the process, where you might need some additional support, and where the teams, groups you might need to reach out to or rely on are going to be involved. And so we've got a list of key questions here that we've come up with that we've found, especially in some of the changes that have come forward recently to our office and that we've supported folks through, that have been really helpful in some of those initial guiding discussions, especially for some groups that are just in the outset of trying to figure out what that change looks like and what they might need in terms of support, ideation, development, and then the eventual development of a proposal. So thinking about what resources might be needed to develop and or implement changes, who needs to be involved? So whether that's who the change impacts, whether that's stakeholders that are involved, whether that's people within your faculty, whether that's the creation of a team to implement a change. Timing is really important, as Kelly mentioned, but also thinking about timing too in terms of why now? So why are we thinking about this change? Is there an issue that we're running into in our programs, in our faculties, that has been a reason for this change that preempts this change, or are we trying to be proactive and trying to address upcoming priorities that we can see coming down the line, whether it's in 1, 2, 5, 10 years. Another key question to think about too, again, small changes, large changes, is how they align with the university's strategic priorities and commitments. So ahead of tomorrow, the Presidential Task Force on EDIA, Etapitope, work integrated learning, experiential learning, sustainability. There are many different strategic priorities and commitments here at the university. Not every change will need to draw heavily on all elements of these strategies and priorities, but it is really important for a lot of these changes to understand how they fit into that broader picture, regardless of how big or small they might be. And then finally, a couple of key questions to maybe consider, especially around the outset of wanting to implement a change. What's the goal? So you're thinking about a change that you'd like to make. What's the eventual goal of that change? And is what you're proposing the best way to get there? And are there expectations, either preconceived or ones that you're hoping to have happen in the process related to this change? So are you expecting it within a certain amount of time? Are you expecting to move through a certain process? So as Kelly mentioned earlier on in our workshop today, if you're thinking it might be one of those smaller changes, and you're coming in expecting that it's a smaller change, that's really helpful for us to know, for other teams to know, in case it does turn into perhaps a larger change, or we find out information that that might change a timeline or a process in that way. And so these key questions, again, these slides will be shared, but they're really important to just kind of start out thinking about change with these questions in mind, so that you're starting from a place of discovery around this change, and not just hoping to bring through a change for the sake of the change. So next slide. And so what I'll do next is there's kind of 3 buckets of considerations that we've come up with that we think would be really helpful for folks thinking about making changes. Again, large scale changes, small scale changes, and everything in between. And the first key consideration is resources. And so resources is a big one. And there's many types of resources that can be required when making curricular changes. Again, anything between small changes all the way up to large changes requiring load changes. And some of these resources include things like budget, financial resources, so hiring budgets, the types of staff that might be required to implement these types of changes. Changes in how courses are run often have budgetary implications. Time is a really big resource that we often don't think about, but is absolutely a part of any type of curricular change. And this includes everything from the proposed timeline for implementation for this change, all the way through the time it takes to bring a change forward in terms of governance committees. If you're developing a course, for example, the time it takes to actually develop the course, create a calendar entry, and then try to implement that course. All of these things take different amounts of time, but are important to consider when you're developing or proposing a curricular change. As Morag mentioned, a little bit in terms of capacity, like those faculty or curricular champions that you have already, or you may need to seek out to be able to lead change. There's a lot of things that are happening in everyone's role, everyone's portfolio that take up time, take up capacity. And if folks don't have the capacity to bring these changes forward, then that might change timeline, ability to actually successfully implement the change. So considering the capacity that your current unit or your team has is really important in terms of what you might actually be able to do in terms of a curricular change. Knowledge, so in terms of the disciplinary expertise that does or may not yet exist in your unit or in your faculty around implementing some larger scale changes. On the smaller scale side as well, if you're hoping to develop a new course, if that expertise already exists, or if you'd have to seek expertise from elsewhere in your unit or other units at the university, or perhaps outside of the university as well. And then finally, space. So using existing spaces, new spaces on campus, spaces that are hoping to be built. For example, the multidisciplinary hub in science that was just announced, that's a new space that may or may not be able to be used for different teaching spaces, different experiential learning spaces, or off-campus spaces as well. So thinking about if a change that you're making or proposing is going to require a differential use of space compared to what you currently are doing, not doing in your unit or in the faculty you're part of. And this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but it is really helpful to think about resources in a sense that is more holistic than just thinking about resources as very operational, finite pieces that are required to make a change happen. There are many resources that go into making curricular changes happen, and the sooner we can identify the resources that we have and the resources that we might need, the easier it is to support curriculum changes both within your unit and then from offices like the Taylor Institute and the Program Innovation Hub. And while smaller changes might require fewer resources than larger scale changes, especially depending on how far they need to go in terms of approval, there are still multiple areas of resources, multiple categories of resources that can be impacted by the development of curricular changes. And so considering what you have available to you and what you might need either from us or from the broader institution increases the chances of success with the curricular change you're hoping to make. Next slide. And so a second really important consideration is around consultation. And so this sort of draws a little bit on resources being a key consideration in terms of who needs to be involved. But consultation is generally an indispensable piece of this process. Again, regardless of whether it's a small change, medium-sized change, all the way up to a large-scale curriculum change. And so there's like lots of different types of consultation that you may want to engage in as part of a curriculum change. It doesn't necessarily need to be exhaustive and encompass everything that's listed here, but these are some types of consultation that we normally see come up in groups that are hoping to enact or develop some type of curriculum change. So anything running from focus groups, surveys, workshops, engaging in department meetings depending on the structure of your unit. So that can include department council, executive committees, other committees within your specific unit, department, or space at the university. And then especially with larger curriculum changes or even at the course level, even at the calendar level, meeting with experts or leads on teams that have maybe some of that institutional knowledge or expertise that isn't quite there in your unit yet, or that you're hoping to draw on. So again, the Taylor Institute being one of those groups, our team with the Program Innovation Hub, as well as consideration for working with the Office of Indigenous Engagement, EDI leads in your faculty, to see, or to go back to that piece around, does the change that you're proposing, does it align with strategic and institutional priorities at the university? And if there are questions around whether or not it does, then there are experts and there are teams here at the institution that can help provide that support if that's an area that you're hoping to have addressed. And then in terms of who needs to be consulted, again, this comes back to who's impacted, and the people who are impacted are generally the ones who need to be consulted. So your mileage may vary depending on the size of the change that you're hoping to implement, as well as the nature of the change that you're hoping to implement. But you might want to consult really anybody on this list. So that includes current students and or alumni, faculty, staff, again, those program or subject matter experts, and university offices. And if your unit or your discipline requires accreditation, then often accreditation bodies, employers, these are groups that become really important in the process of curriculum change and curriculum development to ensure alignment with some of these external requirements that don't necessarily exist at the institution, but are still really important for programs and disciplines to consider. Next slide. And then the last sort of bucket that we'll chat about here, and then we'll have a little bit of time to pause and ask any questions or go back through the rest of this afternoon's content. But this third bucket here is really about process. And so we've touched a little bit on timelines sort of throughout the presentation. We've talked about it in terms of what those timelines can look like. We've talked a little bit about governance structures. We've talked about time itself as an important resource. And so where that becomes a really key consideration is thinking about processes, and sort of a curriculum change requires movement through numerous processes to happen, and understanding what types of processes that need to be considered, accounted for as part of developing a change becomes really important in terms of having realistic expectations around how quickly and how effectively we can develop and implement some of those changes. And so again, this isn't an exhaustive list. There are many, many other processes at the university and probably internal to your unit as well that we would want to consider, but there's department or unit level processes, and those include any internal governance committees or structures that your department or unit might have, as well as any consultations that are unique to your unit or that you'd like to hold within your department and internally. There's the institution-wide processes that Kelly touched on earlier on in our presentation. So talking about those university governance committees, that example of decision support team is a really good one because that's a really helpful institutional process that a lot of changes do end up going through and getting some really helpful feedback from, as well as operational processes. So if you are making a change that requires input from the Office of the Registrar, or that requires operational changes around tuition and fee collection, like these are different types of processes, but ones that still need to occur and may or may not impact how quickly you're able to implement something, or the timing of when something is implemented in your unit or for students that are impacted by the change. There's, again, for more on the large scale side of things, Kelly mentioned with load changes, if the ministry needs to be involved, there are ministry processes to consider. So that includes ministry approval, potentially referral to the Campus Alberta Quality Council, depending on the scale of the changes. Again, not all program changes or curricular changes have to go through this process, but it is one that we want to just make sure if we need it, we know that we need it in advance. And then again, any external or third-party processes, going back to that accreditation, if your discipline requires accreditation, including them and their respective processes as a consideration in a curriculum change if the change you're proposing may impact accreditation, as well as if it's applicable, employer or other stakeholder consultations outside of the university if there are relationships with industry, future employers that are really important to consider as part of this change, or if they might be impacted in some way. Again, not all these processes are going to necessarily be the case for every single change, but it is important to know what processes you'll need to be a part of kind of throughout the process, because they do have a pretty significant impact on your implementation and development timelines. It is a lot, and so our teams are here to help support all the different processes you'll end up moving through, but it is helpful to kind of map this out right at the outset, so there's more realistic expectations from units around sort of what this will look like.
And if there are no burning questions at this time, we just have a couple of closing slides to end the conversation and just remind you of some of the resources and supports that are available. So I'll just pop the PowerPoint back on, but obviously please interrupt me if you do have a question. So just a reminder that regardless of the nature of the change, the Program Innovation Hub is here to support you. So should you choose to use the Program Innovation Hub services, you will be assigned to a program proposal liaison, which will be one of Kelly, Jessica, or Elizabeth, who's also on the call, as Jessica mentioned. And these liaisons are really here to kind of be your first point of contact. So the second that you know you want to make a change, it's best to loop the Program Innovation Hub into that idea right away so that they can provide appropriate support as needed. And they can offer support that's tailored to the needs of your unit. So if you have a group that is really active and involved in the change, that's great. If you're kind of working on it on your own, we are able to provide a little bit more support. So it really just depends on the needs of your unit and the nature of the changes involved. And the other thing that we can help with is to connect you to relevant units like Morrig and her team, or myself. I'll liaise with other representatives from the TI, which I'll talk about in a moment, to make sure that you are accessing all of the right resources and getting the right feedback within the right time frame for your proposal or change. And we'll also kind of shepherd you through that governance process. So you will never have to go to those committee meetings by yourself. Someone will always be there with you and can help support the question and answer period if stuff comes up that you're not sure how to answer, but just know that we are there to support you in that way as well. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the teams in the Taylor Institute as well who might be able to support you. So in terms of program learning outcomes, curriculum mapping, and sort of general program development, my role as EDC in curricular innovation and renewal would kind of be your first point of contact between the Program Innovation Hub and the TI. But I do also have colleagues in the Taylor Institute who do support program innovation and sort of those curriculum review pieces who have great expertise in these areas. So whether it's me or Patty DeJure or Kim Grant, you will have the support you need from that perspective. We also have a very competent and comprehensive learning technologies and instructional design team. So if you're looking for support with course design, for example, instructional design, incorporating learning technologies, we can connect you to that team. It's led by Patrick Kelly and Darcy Norman, and they will assign somebody to support you with whatever changes you're proposing. For strategic alignment, I just wanted to highlight that we do have 2 educational development consultants with exceptional expertise in the areas of Indigenous ways of knowing and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we typically connect proponents to these individuals, to Christine and Fauzia, to ensure that you have sort of properly consulted or started the conversations about the relationship between the proposal that you're developing and the sort of institutional priorities through the EDIA task force, for example, or the Indigenous strategy, to ensure that everything is in alignment. And there are other resources as well, resources as well. I know Norma's on this call, so we do have the Atapatope Working Circle number 4, which supports programs as well. Norma, did you want to say something? Or oh no. So there is lots of support available to you in those areas. And finally, if the nature of your change or what you're proposing has to do with work integrated or experiential learning, Erin Kaipainen leads our experiential and work integrated learning office. And she also has a very robust team who are available to support any changes that are being made in that area. All this to say, between the Program Innovation Hub and myself, we'll ensure that you are connected through to the right people in the right time frame to make sure that your proposal is as successful as possible. And last but not least, I just wanted to highlight that there are a couple more program innovation workshops coming up this term. We have expertise from our finance team in the form of Colleen Jacobson, who has sat on the decision support team for several years, who is going to lead us in a workshop on building a program proposal budget. This is primarily geared towards our finance partners, who we would encourage you to connect with should there be any budgetary implications on the proposal that you're developing, but it is open to everyone. So if you feel like you're going in blind to these budget sections of a proposal, we will provide some sort of introductory material to how best to approach that. And then Christine, who I just mentioned, will be leading a session in May on Indigenous ways of knowing and program design. So there's lots still to come. And we hope that you'll be able to join us. The registration information should go up shortly for both of those. And I will, as I always do, kind of send a reminder invitation to everyone in advance of those sessions. So that is it from us. I see there's a couple comments in the chat. Yes, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions now, feel free to ask them, but otherwise, please connect with us offline and we're happy to make any connections or ensure that you get the right support that you need at any time. So just keep us in the loop as you go forward.